Have you ever witnessed someone's entire worldview shatter in a single moment? In cities like Las Vegas, where power and prejudice often walk hand in hand, that moment can change everything. The crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the private dining room of Benedetti's, the most exclusive restaurant in Las Vegas. Don Salvatore Benedetti sat at the head of the mahogany table, his dark eyes surveying the faces of his family members gathered for their monthly dinner. At 34, he commanded respect through presence alone. His black hair was styled impeccably, his olive skin speaking to generations of Sicilian heritage, and his expensive charcoal suit fit his tall, broad-shouldered frame like it had been crafted specifically for him. Which, of course, it had. "My wife will be pale, fragile, and traditional Italian," Salvatore declared, cutting into his osso buco with precise movements. "Someone who understands the importance of family, who will give me strong sons and beautiful daughters. Someone who knows her place in this world." His nephew Marco, 26 and eager to please, nodded enthusiastically. "Of course, Uncle Sal. The Corsini family has several daughters who would be perfect matches. Traditional values, excellent breeding, beautiful in that classic Italian way." Salvatore's mother, Francesca Benedetti, a petite woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, set down her wine glass with a slight clink. "And what if love doesn't follow your specifications, mio figlio? Love follows wisdom, mama. I've built this empire by making smart choices, not emotional ones. My future wife will complement my position, not challenge it. She'll be someone who can stand beside me at charity galas and family gatherings, someone elegant and refined who understands that her role is to support, not to compete." The conversation continued around him, but Salvatore's attention drifted to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Las Vegas Strip. Below, the Palazzo Benedetti Casino glittered like a jewel among the other hotels and casinos. His legitimate empire, the face he showed the world, while his other business interests remained carefully hidden. He'd worked 15 years to build this reputation, to transform the Benedetti name from whispered rumors to respected prominence. His phone buzzed against the mahogany table. The caller ID showed Vincent Torres, his head of security at the casino. "Salvatore, we have a situation at the Palazzo. You need to get here now." The line went dead before he could respond. Salvatore's jaw tightened as he stood, his chair scraping softly against the floor. "Family, I need to handle something at the casino." "Mama, have Giuseppe drive you home." "What's wrong?" his mother asked, her maternal instincts immediately alert. "Nothing I can't handle. Business never sleeps in this city." The drive from his restaurant to the Palazzo took 12 minutes through the glittering chaos of the Strip. Salvatore sat in the back of his armored Mercedes, his mind cycling through possibilities. The Torino family had been making moves lately, trying to muscle in on his territory. They'd been testing boundaries for months, probing for weaknesses in his operations. But they'd never been bold enough to make a direct move against the Palazzo. The scene that greeted him when he arrived made his blood turn to ice. Emergency vehicles lined the circular drive, their red and blue lights painting the casino's elegant facade in harsh, urgent colors. The bomb squad truck sat among the ambulances and fire engines like a herald of war. Vincent Torres met him at the entrance, his usually composed demeanor cracked with stress. "Boss, they hit the main gaming floor. Small device, but it was meant to send a message. We've got 6 injured, 3 critical. The bastards timed it for maximum psychological impact without bringing down federal heat." "Casualties?" Salvatore demanded, his voice deadly calm. "Mrs. Chun from the high roller section, concussion and lacerations. 2 dealers, Marco Rosselli and Jennifer Wong, both stable. 3 civilians, including your nephew Antonio. He was here with friends when it went off." Salvatore's hands clenched into fists. Antonio was his sister's boy, barely 22 and still in college. The kid had no involvement in the family business, was supposed to be protected from this world. "Where is he?" "University Medical Center. The doctors are working on him now. Internal bleeding, possible spleen damage. They called in a specialist." As they walked through the casino, Salvatore surveyed the damage with calculating eyes. The explosion had been contained to one section, but the message was clear. The Torinos were declaring war, and they were willing to hurt innocents to make their point. His phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Harrison Webb, the chief of staff at University Medical Center, and someone who owed Salvatore several favors. "Mr. Benedetti, your nephew is in surgery. We've brought in our best trauma surgeon to handle the case. She's excellent, probably the most skilled surgeon on the West Coast. He'll be in good hands. I want updates every 30 minutes. Of course, the surgeon's name is Dr. Zara Williams. She's remarkable, truly gifted. If anyone can save Antonio, it's her." Salvatore ended the call and turned to Vincent. "I want every available man on this. Find out how they got a device inside my casino, find out who helped them, and find out where the Torinos are hiding. And get me a car to the hospital. Now." The drive to University Medical Center felt like the longest 20 minutes of Salvatore's life. Antonio wasn't just his nephew. He was like a younger brother. The boy's father had died when Antonio was 8, and Salvatore had stepped into that role, making sure the kid stayed in school, stayed away from the family business, had a chance at a normal life. Now that normal life was hanging in the balance because of Salvatore's world. University Medical Center rose before them like a monument to hope and desperation, its windows glowing against the desert night. Salvatore strode through the emergency department entrance with Vincent flanking him, his presence immediately noticed by the staff. He'd donated enough money to this hospital over the years to have a wing named after him. Dr. Webb met them in the surgical waiting area, a corridor lined with uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines that had witnessed thousands of families in crisis. "Mr. Benedetti, the surgery is still ongoing. Dr. Williams has been working for over 2 hours now. The damage was extensive, but she's making progress. I want to see her. She's in surgery, as I mentioned. I can't interrupt the procedure." Salvatore's dark eyes fixed on the older man with an intensity that made Dr. Webb take a step back. "I didn't ask if you could interrupt. I want to see her work. There's an observation deck above or 3. You can see the procedure from there, but you cannot interfere in any way." The observation deck was small, designed for medical students and teaching purposes. Through the thick glass, Salvatore could see into the operating room below. Banks of monitors showed vital signs. Surgical equipment gleamed under the bright lights, and in the center of it all, a figure in surgical scrubs worked with precise, confident movements. Dr. Zara Williams commanded the operating room like a general commanding troops. She was tall, probably 5'8", with rich brown skin that glowed under the surgical lights. Her natural hair was pulled back under her surgical cap, but he could see the elegant curve of her neck, the graceful line of her shoulders as she worked. Her hands moved with absolute certainty, no hesitation, no doubt. This was someone who had mastered her craft completely. "She's beautiful," Vincent murmured beside him. Salvatore said nothing, but he couldn't deny what he was seeing. Dr. Zara Williams was stunning in a way that had nothing to do with the pale, fragile ideal he'd described just hours earlier. Her beauty was strength incarnate, confidence made flesh, intelligence and competence radiating from every movement. "Pressure's stabilizing," she said to her team, her voice carrying clearly through the intercom system. "Suction here. I need better visualization of the splenic artery." Her voice was warm honey with steel underneath, completely in control of the situation. She moved around the operating table like a dancer, every step purposeful, every gesture economical and precise. When one of her residents made a suggestion, she listened, considered, then either implemented it or explained why a different approach was better. She was teaching even in the middle of this life-or-death surgery. Salvatore found himself leaning forward, mesmerized by her competence. In his world, power was often about dominance, about forcing others to bend to your will. But what he was witnessing was a different kind of power entirely. This was mastery earned through years of dedication, skill honed through countless hours of practice, authority granted through proven excellence. The surgery continued for another hour. Salvatore watched every moment, unable to look away. When Dr. Williams finally stepped back from the operating table and pulled off her surgical gloves, he saw her shoulders relax for the first time. The worst was over. "Excellent work, team. Let's get him to recovery and monitor for the next 24 hours. I want hourly updates on his vitals and immediate notification if there are any changes." She began to leave the OR, and Salvatore found himself moving toward the stairs that would take him to the surgical floor. He needed to speak with her, needed to thank her for saving Antonio's life. But as he walked, his mind was reeling from what he'd just witnessed. Everything he'd said at dinner, every pronouncement about his ideal wife, felt hollow now. Pale and fragile. Traditional and submissive. Dr. Zara Williams was none of those things, and she was magnificent. The surgical floor hallway was quiet at this late hour, most of the day staff long gone home to their families. Salvatore positioned himself near the doors, Vincent maintaining a respectful distance. When Dr. Williams emerged, pulling off her surgical cap to reveal intricately braided hair that fell to her shoulders, Salvatore felt something shift in his chest. She was even more beautiful up close. Her brown eyes were intelligent and compassionate, her features strong and elegant. She was probably in her early 30s, with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was worth. When she saw him waiting, she didn't seem intimidated or flustered like most people meeting him for the first time. Instead, she simply waited for him to speak. Dr. Williams, I'm Salvatore Benedetti. Antonio is my nephew. Mr. Benedetti. Her voice held the same warm authority he'd heard in the OR. Your nephew is stable. The surgery went well, though the next 24 hours will be critical. He's young and strong, which works in his favor. Thank you. Those words felt insufficient for what she'd just done, but they were all he had. You saved his life. I did my job. She studied his face for a moment, those intelligent brown eyes seeming to see more than most people. He's lucky to have family who cares so much. Not everyone has that. There was something in her tone, a hint of personal experience, that made Salvatore want to know more about her story. But before he could ask, Dr. Webb appeared with a clipboard and an apologetic expression. Dr. Williams, I hate to interrupt, but we have a situation in the ER. Multi-vehicle accident on the interstate, and they're requesting you specifically. Dr. Williams nodded, already shifting back into professional mode. Of course. Mr. Benedetti, you can see your nephew in about an hour when he's settled in recovery. The nurses will keep you updated. She started to walk away, then paused and turned back to him. Mr. Benedetti, the police mentioned that this might not have been an accident. If that's true, if someone did this intentionally, then your nephew isn't the only victim tonight. Please be careful. Her concerns seemed genuine, not the calculated politeness of someone trying to curry favor with a wealthy donor. She was worried about him, about a man she'd just met, because it was in her nature to care about people. Salvatore watched her walk away, her confident stride carrying her toward whatever emergency waited in the trauma bay, and realized that everything he thought he knew about what he wanted had just been turned upside down. Vincent cleared his throat softly. Boss, we should check on the security situation at the palazzo. In a minute. Salvatore was still staring down the hallway where Dr. Williams had disappeared. For the first time in his adult life, his carefully planned future felt like a cage, and he was questioning everything he'd built it on. The next hour passed in a blur of phone calls and updates from the casino. The Torino family had made their statement, but they'd also made a mistake. The bombing had left evidence, and Vincent's team was already tracking down leads. Salvatore coordinated the response with half his attention while the other half remained focused on the remarkable woman who'd saved his nephew's life. When he was finally allowed to see Antonio, the young man was unconscious but stable, monitors beeping steadily beside his bed. Salvatore stood beside the hospital bed, looking down at the boy who'd been like a son to him, and felt rage and gratitude warring in his chest. Rage at the people who'd done this, and gratitude toward the woman who'd undone their damage. Uncle Sal, Antonio's voice was weak but alert as his eyes fluttered open. Hey kid, how do you feel? Like I got hit by a truck. What happened? Someone wanted to send me a message. They used you to deliver it. Salvatore's voice was gentle with his nephew but edged with steel when he spoke of his enemies. But you're going to be fine. The doctor who operated on you is the best in the city. I remember her a little. Beautiful woman, really confident. Made me feel like everything would be okay, even when I was scared. Before Salvatore could respond, there was a soft knock on the doorframe. Dr. Williams stood in the doorway, having changed from surgical scrubs into dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that highlighted her complexion. Her hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and she carried herself with the same confidence he'd observed in the OR. Mr. Benedetti, Antonio, I wanted to check on you before I left for the night. Doc, Antonio smiled weakly. Thank you for saving my life. Like I told your uncle, I was just doing my job. But I'm glad I could help. Dr. Williams moved to the beside, checking the monitors with practiced efficiency. Your numbers look good. You should be able to go home in a few days if you continue to improve at this rate. Salvatore watched her interact with his nephew, noting the genuine warmth in her manner, the way she explained everything in terms Antonio could understand, the gentle competence of her examination. This was who she was, he realized. Someone who healed people, someone who made the world better through her presence in it. Dr. Williams, would you join me for coffee? The words left his mouth before his brain could edit them. To discuss Antonio's recovery, of course. She studied him for a moment, those intelligent eyes seeming to weigh his request against something he couldn't identify. I don't usually socialize with patients' families, Mr. Benedetti. This isn't socializing. It's gratitude. And call me Salvatore. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. All right, Salvatore. There's a decent coffee shop on the 3rd floor. It's quiet this time of night. As they walked toward the elevators, Salvatore found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. She moved with unconscious grace, her height putting her at eye level with his shoulder, close enough that he could catch the subtle scent of her perfume beneath the antiseptic hospital smells. When the elevator arrived, he gestured for her to enter first, and she acknowledged the courtesy with a nod. So, she said as the elevator began its ascent, what do you do when you're not worrying about family members in surgery? I own several businesses in the city. Hotels, restaurants, some real estate development. Salvatore kept his answer deliberately vague, the same practiced response he gave to anyone outside his inner circle. The casino where the bombing happened, that's yours. Yes. He was surprised by her directness, but then again, everything about Dr. Zara Williams seemed to defy his expectations. I'm sorry that happened. Violence like that, it affects everyone, not just the immediate victims. The coffee shop was nearly empty, just a tired-looking resident grabbing espresso before returning to his shift. Salvatore and Dr. Williams found a table by the windows overlooking the city. Las Vegas spread below them, a glittering carpet of light and promise and broken dreams. You're not from here originally, Salvatore observed as their coffee arrived. No, I grew up in Chicago. Came here for my residency and fell in love with the desert. There's something about the landscape here, the way it strips everything down to essentials. It's honest in a way that cities sometimes aren't. And your family? Dr. Williams wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, and for the first time since he'd met her, Salvatore saw a flicker of vulnerability in her expression. My parents are both doctors, cardiac surgeon and pediatric oncologist. Very high achievers, very focused on excellence. They taught me that if you're going to do something, you do it better than anyone else. Is that pressure or inspiration? Both. She smiled, but there was complexity behind it. Growing up as a black woman in medicine, you learn early that you have to be twice as good to get half the recognition. My parents made sure I was ready for that reality. Salvatore found himself leaning forward, genuinely interested in her story in a way that surprised him. His usual interactions with women were carefully orchestrated social dances, conversations that followed predictable patterns toward predictable ends. But talking with Dr. Williams felt different. She challenged him without being confrontational, engaged with him as an equal rather than trying to impress or manipulate him. What made you choose trauma surgery specifically? I like the immediacy of it. When someone comes into there's no time for politics or games or anything except saving their life. It's pure medicine at its most essential. Plus, she added with a slight smile, I'm good under pressure. That was an understatement based on what he'd witnessed tonight. Under pressure, Dr. Williams was magnificent. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing naturally from her work to his legitimate business interests to their shared appreciation for the strange beauty of Las Vegas. Salvatore found himself sharing stories he rarely told, observations about the city and his place in it that felt more honest than anything he'd said in years. When Dr. Williams finally glanced at her watch and announced that she needed to get home, Salvatore felt a genuine pang of disappointment. The evening had passed too quickly, and he wasn't ready for it to end. Thank you for the coffee, she said as they waited for the elevator. And for letting me get to know the man behind the grateful uncle facade. Facade. Everyone wears masks, Salvatore. Some are just more obvious than others. The elevator arrived, and as they descended toward the main floor, Salvatore found himself studying her reflection in the polished steel doors. Dr. Zara Williams was everything he'd claimed he didn't want in a woman and everything he was beginning to realize he actually needed. When they reached the lobby, Vincent was waiting by the entrance, his posture alert and professional. Dr. Williams noticed him immediately, her medical training making her observant of details most people would miss. "Security?" she asked quietly. "Precautions. After tonight, I'm not taking any chances." Dr. Williams nodded, accepting his explanation without judgment. "Well, thank you again for the coffee. And Salvatore, be careful out there. Antonio is going to need his uncle around for a long time." She walked toward the parking garage with that same confident stride, and Salvatore watched until she disappeared from view. Vincent approached with the careful expression of someone who'd been observing his boss's behavior and drawing conclusions. "Interesting evening, boss." Indeed it was. Salvatore's mind was already working, planning how he could see Dr. Williams again without making it seem like he was pursuing her. Which he absolutely was, despite the fact that she represented everything his carefully ordered world had told him to avoid. As they drove back toward the strip, Salvatore's phone buzzed with updates from his team. The investigation into the bombing was progressing, security at all his properties had been tripled, and the Torino family's message had been received and would be answered appropriately. But his thoughts kept returning to intelligent brown eyes and a voice like warm honey with steel underneath. Dr. Zara Williams had saved his nephew's life tonight, but Salvatore was beginning to suspect she might have done something far more dangerous than that. She might have saved his soul. 3 days later, Salvatore stood in the sterile hallway of University Medical Center's recovery wing, holding a bouquet of white roses that suddenly seemed inadequate. Antonio was being discharged, his recovery nothing short of miraculous according to the medical staff. But Salvatore wasn't here just for his nephew. He was here because he hadn't been able to stop thinking about Dr. Zara Williams. The woman had invaded his thoughts with surgical precision, disrupting his carefully ordered world in ways he couldn't quite understand. Every business meeting, every phone call, every moment of his day was interrupted by memories of intelligent brown eyes and the confident way she'd commanded that operating room. "Mr. Benedetti." Her voice came from behind him, and Salvatore turned to find Dr. Williams approaching with Antonio's discharge papers in her hand. She wore dark blue scrubs today, her hair pulled back in a professional bun, but even in the clinical hospital attire, her beauty was undeniable. "Dr. Williams." He found himself straightening unconsciously, the same way he might prepare for an important business negotiation, though this felt infinitely more dangerous than any boardroom confrontation. "Antonio's doing exceptionally well. Young men his age heal fast, especially when they have good support systems." She handed him the papers, her fingers briefly brushing his, and Salvatore felt that small contact like an electric current. "You should be proud of how you've taken care of him. He's family." Salvatore's voice came out rougher than he intended. "In my world, family is everything." Dr. Williams studied his face for a moment, those perceptive eyes seeing more than he was comfortable revealing. "In my world, too," she said quietly, "though I've learned that sometimes the family you choose is just as important as the one you're born into." Before Salvatore could explore that intriguing statement, Antonio appeared in the doorway of his room, moving slowly but under his own power. His face lit up when he saw both of them waiting for him. "Uncle Sal," Doc Williams. "Ready to blow this popsicle stand?" "Not quite yet, young man," Dr. Williams said with mock sternness that carried genuine affection. "Let's go over your recovery instructions one more time. No heavy lifting for 6 weeks, no contact sports for at least 8 weeks, and I want to see you for follow-up appointments every 2 weeks for the next month." "Got it," Antonio grinned. "Though I have to say, having the most beautiful doctor in Las Vegas checking up on me isn't exactly a hardship." Salvatore felt an unexpected spike of something that might have been jealousy, which was ridiculous. Antonio was his nephew, barely out of college, and clearly just expressing the kind of harmless appreciation that came naturally to young men. But the feeling lingered anyway, a possessive edge that surprised him with its intensity. Dr. Williams handled the compliment with practiced grace, neither encouraging it nor taking offense. "Flattery will not get you out of following doctor's orders, Mr. Benedetti. Your uncle will make sure you behave yourself, won't you?" She directed the question to Salvatore, and he found himself caught between his nephew's amused grin and her expectant gaze. Absolutely. Though in my experience, keeping a Benedetti man in line requires more than gentle suggestions. Are you implying that the men in your family are naturally rebellious? Dr. Williams asked with a slight smile that made Salvatore's pulse quicken. I'm stating it as fact. We don't follow orders well unless we respect the person giving them. The comment was meant to be playful, but the moment it left his mouth, Salvatore realized how it might sound. As if he was suggesting that Dr. Williams, as a woman, might not command the same respect as a man. The thought hadn't consciously crossed his mind, but he could see from the subtle shift in her expression that she'd heard the possible interpretation. Well then, she said, her voice taking on a cooler edge, it's fortunate that I've had plenty of experience earning respect from difficult men. Shall we finish the discharge process? The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop several degrees, and Salvatore cursed himself internally. He'd spent the last 3 days thinking about this woman, anticipating this conversation, and within 5 minutes he'd managed to insult her. Not intentionally, but the damage was clearly done. The discharge process took another 20 minutes, during which Dr. Williams remained professionally courteous but noticeably more distant. She explained Antonio's medication schedule, demonstrated proper wound care, and answered all of Salvatore's questions with the same competence she brought to everything else. But the easy warmth from their coffee conversation was gone, replaced by polite efficiency. When the paperwork was complete and Antonio was settled in a wheelchair for the required ride to the hospital entrance, Dr. Williams walked alongside them toward the elevator. Salvatore found himself searching for a way to address what had happened, to explain that he hadn't meant to diminish her authority or expertise. Dr. Williams, he began as they waited for the elevator, I want to apologize if my comment about following orders sounded dismissive. That wasn't my intention. She looked at him directly, those intelligent brown eyes measuring his sincerity. What was your intention? The question was simple, but Salvatore found himself struggling to answer it honestly. Because the truth was complicated. His intention had been to flirt with her, to establish some kind of connection that went beyond professional courtesy. But his methods were apparently rusty, shaped by interactions with women who either worked for him or were trying to gain something from him. I was trying to pay you a compliment, he said finally, pointing out that you command respect naturally. But I realize it came out wrong. The elevator arrived, and they stepped inside with Antonio, who was wisely staying out of the conversation. Dr. Williams remained quiet for several floors, and Salvatore began to think she wasn't going to respond at all. You know what's interesting about respect? She said as they descended past the 3rd floor. Some people think it has to be earned through force or intimidation. Others understand that true respect comes from competence and character. I've found that the people who automatically assume I need to prove myself usually fall into the first category. Salvatore felt the criticism land with surgical accuracy. She was right, of course. His comment had revealed exactly the kind of thinking he'd claimed to have moved beyond. The assumption that a woman, especially a black woman, would naturally face more skepticism about her authority. You're right, he said quietly. And I apologize for that assumption. Dr. Williams studied his face for a long moment, seeming to weigh his sincerity against something else he couldn't identify. Apology accepted. But Salvatore, can I ask you something? Of course. When you look at me, what do you see? The question caught him completely off guard. The elevator continued its descent in silence, while Salvatore struggled with how to answer honestly. What did he see when he looked at Dr. Zara Williams? Beauty, certainly. Intelligence and competence that commanded his admiration. Strength that both attracted and intimidated him. But underneath all of that, he was beginning to recognize something more complex. I see someone who challenges every assumption I've made about what I want in my life, he said finally. The elevator doors opened on the main floor, but for a moment, none of them moved. Dr. Williams was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, surprise, and something else flickering across her features. That's either very honest or very smooth, she said at last. It's honest, which is probably why it doesn't sound smooth. A genuine smile crossed her face for the first time since his ill-chosen comment about following orders. Well, honesty is refreshing, even when it's complicated. They made their way through the lobby toward the main entrance, where Vincent was waiting with the car. As they approached the doors, Salvatore's phone buzzed with a text message from his head of security. The message was brief but alarming. Torino soldiers asking questions about the doctor at St. Mary's and Sunrise. They know she operated on Antonio. Salvatore's blood turned cold as he processed the implications. The Torino family wasn't content with their message bombing. They were expanding their target list to include anyone they perceived as connected to him. And Dr. Williams, through no fault of her own except professional excellence, was now on that list. Dr. Williams, he said quietly, pulling her aside as Antonio was helped into the car. We need to talk privately. It's urgent. She must have heard something in his tone that alarmed her, because her medical training kicked in immediately, her attention focusing on him with laser intensity. What's wrong? The people who hurt Antonio, they know you treated him. They're asking questions about you at other hospitals. Her expression remained calm, but Salvatore could see her mind working rapidly behind those intelligent eyes. What kind of questions? The kind that suggest they see you as a potential leverage point against me. He hated having to say it. Hated that his world had reached out to touch someone who had only tried to help. I can provide security for you. Discreet, but effective. I don't need protection, Mr. Benedetti. I need information. Who are these people, and what exactly do they want? Salvatore found himself caught between admiration for her calm response and frustration at her independence. Most people in her situation would have accepted his offer immediately, grateful for any help he could provide. But Dr. Williams was not most people. They're competitors of mine who want to send a message about overstepping boundaries. They hurt Antonio to hurt me, and now they're looking at you as another pressure point. Competitors, she repeated, and he could hear the skepticism in her voice. In the restaurant business, among others, Dr. Williams studied his face for a long moment, clearly recognizing that he wasn't telling her the whole truth. But instead of pushing for details, she simply nodded. I can take care of myself. I've been doing it for a long time. I don't doubt your capability, but these people play by different rules. Please, just let me provide some security. A few men to keep an eye on things, make sure you're safe. And in return, nothing. This isn't a negotiation, Dr. Williams. It's an attempt to prevent you from being hurt because you helped my family. She was quiet for several minutes, watching the traffic flow past the hospital entrance. When she spoke again, her voice was measured and careful. If I agree to limited security, it's temporary. And I want to know exactly who these people are and what measures you're taking to resolve this situation permanently. Agreed. Salvatore felt relief flood through him, though he recognized that her acceptance came with conditions that would require him to be more forthcoming about his business than he was comfortable with. Fine. But if your security team interferes with my work or makes my colleagues uncomfortable, the deal is off. Understood. Dr. Williams turned to go, then paused and looked back at him. Salvatore, whatever business you're really in, be careful. Antonio needs you alive and whole, not just protected by armed men. She walked away before he could respond, leaving Salvatore standing by the hospital entrance with the uncomfortable realization that Dr. Zara Williams saw through his carefully constructed facades more clearly than anyone had in years. As Vincent pulled the car away from the hospital, Antonio broke the silence that had settled over them. Uncle Sal, are you falling for my doctor? Salvatore considered several responses, all of them denials, before settling on something closer to the truth. I'm beginning to think your doctor might be more dangerous to me than the Torino family. Antonio's laughter filled the car, but Salvatore wasn't entirely joking. Dr. Zara Williams represented everything his rational mind told him to avoid. She was independent, challenging, completely outside his world and his control. She would never be content to stand quietly beside him at charity galas, would never accept being treated as an ornament or accessory. But watching her walk away, confident and competent and utterly herself, Salvatore realized that everything he'd thought he wanted in a wife suddenly felt like settling for less than he deserved. Dr. Williams was forcing him to confront the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong about what would make him happy. And that possibility was absolutely terrifying. The penthouse was magnificent and completely overwhelming. Dr. Zara Williams stood in the center of Salvatore's living room, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the Las Vegas Strip, and tried to process how her life had changed so dramatically in less than a week. The space was massive, all modern furniture and expensive art, the kind of luxury that whispered rather than shouted about wealth. This is temporary, She reminded herself for the 100th time since agreeing to Salvatore's protection. Just until the threat passes. But as she watched Salvatore move around his kitchen with unconscious grace, preparing breakfast as if having a woman in his space was the most natural thing in the world, temporary was beginning to feel like a dangerous word. Because nothing about this situation felt natural to her, yet somehow it also felt frighteningly right. "You don't have to cook for me," she said, settling onto one of the bar stools that lined the marble kitchen island. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." "I know you are." Salvatore cracked eggs into a bowl with practiced efficiency, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms and hands that moved with surprising delicacy. "But I enjoy cooking, and you worked a 16-hour shift yesterday. Let someone take care of you for once." The simple statement hit her harder than it should have. When was the last time someone had insisted on taking care of her? In medical school, during residency, through the grueling years of establishing her career, she'd become so accustomed to self-reliance that accepting help felt almost foreign. But there was something about the way Salvatore moved around his kitchen, the unconscious competence of a man who genuinely enjoyed providing for others, that made her defenses waver. "How did you learn to cook?" she asked, watching him add herbs to what appeared to be becoming an elaborate omelet. "My grandmother, Nana Benedetti, believed that a man who couldn't feed his family was only half a man." Salvatore smiled at the memory, and Zara found herself studying the way his face transformed when he talked about his family. The sharp edges of authority softened into something warmer, more approachable. She taught all her grandsons to cook traditional Sicilian dishes, said it would help us appreciate the work our wives would do for us. And has it? I don't have a wife to appreciate yet. He glanced up from the stove, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "But I'm beginning to understand what she meant about appreciation." The comment hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Zara wasn't sure she was ready to examine. Instead, she focused on her coffee, a rich Italian blend that was probably worth more per pound than most people spent on groceries in a week. The domestic intimacy of sharing breakfast in his kitchen felt dangerously comfortable. She was wearing one of his dress shirts over her jeans, having discovered that her own clothes looked somehow inadequate in his elegant space. The shirt was soft cotton, expensive and perfectly tailored, and it smelled like his cologne. Wearing it felt like an intimacy she hadn't intended but couldn't bring herself to regret. Salvatore's phone buzzed against the marble counter, and Zara noticed the way his expression immediately shifted into business mode as he glanced at the caller ID. He answered in rapid Italian, his voice taking on the kind of authority she'd witnessed in the hospital, but with an edge that was entirely different. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. This was a man giving orders, making decisions that others would follow without question. When he mentioned what sounded like names and locations, his voice carried the kind of cold precision that made Zara suddenly very aware that she didn't really know who Salvatore Benedetti was beyond the grateful uncle and attentive host. The conversation continued for several minutes, during which Salvatore occasionally glanced at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When he finally ended the call, the silence stretched between them until Zara couldn't stand it anymore. "Business trouble?" she asked carefully. "Something like that." Salvatore returned to the stove, but his movements had lost their earlier relaxed grace. The man who'd been cooking for her with gentle attentiveness had been replaced by someone harder, more distant. "You know, for someone in the restaurant business, you certainly deal with a lot of situations that require armed security and coded conversations in Italian." Salvatore went very still, his back to her as he plated their breakfast. When he finally turned around, his expression was carefully neutral in a way that confirmed every suspicion that had been building in Zara's mind. "What are you asking, Zara?" "I'm asking what business you're really in, Salvatore. Because whatever it is, it's dangerous enough that people are willing to bomb public places and threaten innocent doctors. I think I deserve the truth." He set their plates on the counter with deliberate precision, then leaned against the kitchen island, studying her face with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than she was comfortable revealing. "You're right. You do deserve the truth. The question is whether you're prepared to handle it. Try me." Salvatore was quiet for a long moment, and Zara could practically see him weighing options in his mind. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but careful. My family has been in Las Vegas for 3 generations. We've built legitimate businesses, employed hundreds of people, contributed millions to charity. But we've also maintained certain traditional arrangements that exist outside conventional business practices. Traditional arrangements. Protection, information, conflict resolution that doesn't always involve lawyers and courtrooms. The euphemisms were elegant, but Zara understood exactly what he was telling her. She'd grown up in Chicago, had worked in emergency rooms in some of the city's most dangerous neighborhoods. She knew what organized crime looked like, even when it wore expensive suits and spoke in carefully chosen words. You're talking about the mafia. I'm talking about family traditions that predate modern legal structures by several centuries. That's not an answer, Salvatore. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture that made him look younger and more vulnerable than the composed businessman she'd come to know. Yes, my family has connections to what people call organized crime, but it's more complicated than whatever images that phrase brings to mind. We're not the Sopranos, Zara. We don't hurt innocent people, we don't deal drugs, and we don't involve ourselves in anything that harms children. We simply maintain certain traditional arrangements for protection and business coordination. Zara felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as she processed what he was telling her. The man who'd cooked her breakfast, who'd held her hand during her anxiety attack at the hospital, who'd looked at her with genuine respect and growing affection, was admitting to being part of an organized crime family. And the people who hurt Antonio, the Torino family, they're trying to expand their territory into areas where we've maintained traditional arrangements for decades. The bombing was their way of announcing their intentions. So when they threatened me, they were threatening someone I care about as a way to hurt me. The admission hung between them, loaded with emotional weight that neither of them seemed prepared to address directly. Someone I care about. The words echoed in Zara's mind as she struggled to reconcile the man sitting across from her with everything she thought she knew about right and wrong. I need some air, she said finally, standing up from the counter with movements that felt stiff and uncertain. Zara, wait. But she was already walking toward the terrace doors, needing space to think, to process what she'd learned. The terrace was beautiful, decorated with plants and comfortable furniture that created an oasis of calm above the chaos of the strip. But the view that had seemed magical the night before now felt like a reminder of how far she was from her normal life. Salvatore followed her outside, maintaining a respectful distance as she gripped the terrace railing and stared out at the city below. I understand if you want to leave, he said quietly. Vincent can arrange alternative protection for you until this situation is resolved. Is that what you want? The question surprised him. She could tell from the sharp intake of breath behind her. What I want, Zara, is for you to be safe. If that means you leave, then that's what needs to happen. She turned to face him, studying his expression in the bright Nevada sunlight. He looked tired, she realized. The composed authority he wore so naturally seemed to require more effort this morning, as if maintaining his various masks was becoming exhausting. What about what you want for yourself? She asked. That's more complicated. Try me. Again. Salvatore moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to catch the scent of his cologne mixed with coffee and cooking herbs. What I want for myself is something I never thought I'd want. A woman who challenges me, who doesn't need me but chooses to be with me anyway. Someone who sees through all the careful facades and still finds something worth knowing underneath. He paused, his gaze intense and completely focused on her face. I want you, Zara. Not just in my bed, though God knows I want that too. I want your intelligence at my dinner table, your strength beside me when I'm making difficult decisions, your laughter when I take myself too seriously. I want all of you. And that terrifies me because I've never wanted anything I couldn't control or guarantee. The honesty in his voice cut through every defense she'd been building since learning the truth about his business. This was the man who'd watched her save his nephew's life with awe and respect. The man who'd cooked for her because he wanted to take care of her. The man who'd offered protection without expecting anything in return. But he was also someone whose world included violence and illegal activities and moral compromises that went against everything she'd been raised to believe. I don't know if I can do this, she said softly. I've spent my whole life trying to heal people, trying to make the world better through medicine. How do I reconcile that with caring about someone whose business involves hurting people? We don't hurt innocent people, Salvatore repeated. The people we deal with, they chose this world. They know the risks and the rules. And when someone breaks those rules, they face consequences. Sometimes those consequences involve violence. The admission was stark and honest, and Zara appreciated that he didn't try to soften it with euphemisms. But it also crystallized the fundamental conflict between their worlds. She saved lives. He took them, or at least ordered them taken, when he deemed it necessary. Before she could respond, Salvatore's phone buzzed again. This time, when he answered, the conversation was brief and conducted entirely in English, but his expression grew increasingly dark as he listened. "What is it?" Zara asked when he ended the call. "They have Dr. Martinez." Dr. Martinez was her colleague, a pediatric surgeon who'd worked alongside Zara for 3 years. They weren't close friends, but they respected each other professionally, and the thought of Elena Martinez being hurt because of Zara's connection to Salvatore made her stomach clench with guilt. "What do they want?" "They want me to withdraw from the Paradise Project. It's a development deal that would interfere with their money laundering operations. And if you don't, they'll hurt her." Salvatore was already moving back into the penthouse, his casual morning demeanor replaced by the cold efficiency of a man preparing for war. Zara followed him, watching as he made rapid phone calls in that same authoritative tone she'd heard earlier. Within minutes, men were arriving at the penthouse, serious-looking individuals who spoke in low voices and carried themselves with the kind of alertness that suggested extensive training. "What's the plan?" she asked Vincent, who seemed to be coordinating the response. "We find Dr. Martinez and bring her home safely," Vincent replied. "The boss doesn't negotiate with terrorists, whatever they call themselves." Zara watched Salvatore orchestrate the rescue operation with the same competence she'd observed him bringing to business decisions and family situations. But now she was seeing the full scope of his capabilities, the resources he could deploy, the authority he commanded. Men followed his orders without question because they trusted his judgment and feared his displeasure in equal measure. It was impressive and terrifying in equal measure. "I want to come with you," she said as Salvatore checked what appeared to be a very expensive and probably illegal weapon. "Absolutely not. Elena is my colleague. I might be able to help if she's injured. You'll be able to help more by staying here where you're safe. If something happens to you while we're trying to rescue Dr. Martinez, we'll have 2 people to worry about instead of 1. The logic was sound, but Zara hated feeling helpless while someone else was in danger because of her. She also hated acknowledging that Salvatore was right, that she would be a liability in whatever kind of operation he was planning. "How long will this take?" she asked. "A few hours if we're lucky. Longer if we're not. And afterwards?" "Afterwards, we'll have sent a message that threatening innocent people connected to my family is unacceptable." The cold certainty in his voice reminded Zara exactly what kind of message he was talking about. People were going to die today because they'd made the mistake of threatening someone Salvatore cared about. And she was beginning to realize that she was one of the people he cared about, which made her partially responsible for whatever was about to happen. Salvatore approached her as his team made final preparations to leave. His expression had softened slightly, the businessman replaced by something more personal. "I know this isn't easy for you," he said quietly. "Seeing this side of my world, understanding what I'm capable of when the people I care about are threatened. Are you going to kill them?" The question was direct, and Salvatore didn't try to deflect it with euphemisms. "If necessary. And if it's not necessary, then they'll live with the understanding that next time, it will be necessary." Zara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She understood the logic, even supported the goal of rescuing Elena Martinez safely. But the methods, the casual way Salvatore discussed violence as a business tool, challenged every value she'd built her life around. "Wait for me," he said, and before she could respond, he was cupping her face in his hands and kissing her. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if he was asking permission she hadn't quite given. But when she didn't pull away, when she found herself responding despite everything that had happened that morning, he deepened the contact with a hunger that spoke of restraint finally breaking down. This was nothing like the polite, careful kisses she'd received from other men. This was raw need and careful control, strength and gentleness, a claiming that somehow managed to feel like a question rather than a demand. When they finally broke apart, Zara felt dizzy and uncertain and more alive than she'd felt in years. "Come back safely," she whispered against his lips. Count on it. He left with his team, and Zara found herself alone in the penthouse with two guards who maintained respectful distance while making it clear that she wasn't leaving. She spent the next 4 hours alternately pacing the terrace and trying to focus on medical journals, but her mind kept returning to that kiss and everything it represented. When Salvatore finally returned, his expensive shirt was torn and there was blood on his hands that she was fairly certain wasn't his own. But Elena Martinez was with him, shaken but unharmed, and Zara felt a relief so profound it made her knees weak. Elena, thank God you're okay. Dr. Martinez was a small woman in her 40s with kind eyes and steady hands, someone Zara had always respected for her skill and dedication. Now she looked exhausted and frightened, but determined not to show it. I'm fine, Zara. Scared, but fine. Mr. Benedetti's men got me out before anything really bad happened. Salvatore was watching Zara's reunion with her colleague with an expression she couldn't quite read. When Elena excused herself to call her family and reassure them she was safe, he approached Zara with movements that seemed careful, almost hesitant. Is she really okay? Zara asked. Physically, yes. They roughed her up a little, but nothing serious. Emotionally, she'll probably need some time to process what happened. And the people who took her won't be taking anyone else. The simple statement confirmed what Zara had already suspected. Salvatore had kept his word about sending a message, and that message had been delivered with permanent finality. She should have been horrified. Everything in her medical training, her moral upbringing, her fundamental beliefs about the value of human life should have made her recoil from what he'd done. But looking at Elena Martinez, alive and safe because of Salvatore's intervention, Zara found her emotions more complicated than she'd expected. Thank you, she said quietly, for bringing her home safely. You don't have to thank me for protecting people you care about. That's not a favor, Zara. That's what family does. Family. The word hung between them, loaded with implications that made Zara's heart race and her mind spin with possibilities she wasn't sure she was brave enough to consider. Salvatore stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. There was something different in his expression, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before mixed with the same hunger that had driven their kiss hours earlier. I need you to understand something, he said softly. What happened today, what I did to get Dr. Martinez back safely, that's part of who I am. I don't apologize for protecting the people I love, and I don't apologize for eliminating threats against them. If you stay, if you choose this, you're choosing all of it. All of it, she repeated. The protection and the violence. The luxury and the danger. The legitimate businesses and the traditional arrangements. Me, exactly as I am, not some sanitized version that might be easier for you to accept. Zara studied his face, seeing the man who'd cooked her breakfast and held her during a panic attack and risked his life to save her colleague. She also saw the man who commanded criminal enterprises and made life-and-death decisions with cold efficiency. Both were true. Both were him. What are you asking me, Salvatore? I'm asking if you can love a man like me. Not despite what I am, but because of everything I am, including the parts that scare you. The question hit her like a physical blow, stripping away every careful rationalization she'd been building to maintain distance between them. Because that was what this was really about, wasn't it? Not just attraction or temporary fascination, but the possibility of love with a man whose world challenged everything she believed about right and wrong. I don't know, she said honestly, but I know I can't walk away without finding out. Something shifted in Salvatore's expression, a tension she hadn't even realized he'd been carrying finally releasing. When he kissed her this time, it was with the desperation of a man who'd been granted a reprieve from a sentence he'd been dreading. And when Zara kissed him back, pouring all her confusion and desire and tentative hope into the contact, she knew she was crossing a line that would change everything about her carefully ordered life. But for the first time in years, the prospect of change didn't terrify her. It felt like coming alive. The morning after Elena's rescue dawned clear and bright over Las Vegas, but Zara found herself awake before sunrise, watching Salvatore sleep beside her in his massive bed. They hadn't made love yet, despite the electricity that sparked between them every time they touched. Instead, they'd spent hours talking, really talking, about their pasts and fears and the impossible situation they found themselves navigating together. She'd told him about growing up as one of only 3 black students in her medical school class, about the professors who'd questioned whether she belonged there, about the attending physicians who'd assumed she was a nurse rather than a doctor even when she wore the white coat that clearly identified her role. She'd shared the loneliness of always being the only one, of carrying the weight of representation while trying to simply be excellent at what she loved. In return, Salvatore had revealed pieces of himself she suspected few people ever saw. The pressure of inheriting a legacy built on violence and tradition, the constant balancing act between legitimate business and family obligations that existed outside the law, the isolation of never knowing whether people wanted to be close to him or simply wanted access to his power. "You could leave it all," she'd suggested quietly as they lay together in the darkness, her head on his shoulder, his fingers stroking through her hair with unconscious gentleness. "And do what?" he'd asked, not defensively but with genuine curiosity. "I'm not trained for anything else, Zara. This world, these responsibilities, they're all I've ever known. You're intelligent, educated, successful in legitimate business. You could walk away from the traditional arrangements and focus on the restaurants, the hotels, the development projects." Salvatore had been quiet for a long time, and when he finally responded, his voice carried a weight that spoke to years of consideration. "Leaving would mean abandoning people who depend on me for protection, for their livelihoods, for justice when the legal system fails them. It would mean letting the Torinos and families like them fill the vacuum I'd leave behind, and they don't share my ethical boundaries. Sometimes staying in an imperfect system is the most moral choice available." The complexity of his position had kept Zara awake long after Salvatore fell asleep, his breathing deep and even beside her. She was beginning to understand that his world wasn't the black and white morality tale she'd initially assumed. There were shades of gray everywhere, choices between competing goods and lesser evils that made simple judgments impossible. Now, as dawn light filtered through the bedroom windows, she studied his sleeping face and tried to reconcile the gentle man who'd held her through the night with the dangerous one who'd eliminated threats to her colleague without hesitation. Both were true. Both were him. And she was falling in love with the contradiction. "Good morning, beautiful." His voice was rough with sleep, and when he opened those dark eyes to find her watching him, his smile was soft and private, meant only for her. "Good morning." She traced her fingers along his jaw, feeling the slight roughness of morning stubble. "How do you do it?" "Do what?" "Switch between being gentle and being dangerous so easily." Salvatore captured her hand, pressing her palm flat against his chest where she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "It's not switching, Kara. It's the same impulse applied to different situations. I protect what I love, whether that's through tenderness or through violence. The method changes, but the motivation is always the same. Kara." The endearment sent warmth spreading through her chest, partly because of the affection in his voice and partly because it represented acceptance from a man who'd declared his preference for pale, traditional Italian women. Before she could respond, Salvatore's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He glanced at the caller ID and sighed. "My mother. She wants to meet you." "Meet me." Apparently, word has spread through the family that I'm involved with someone. In Italian families, that means Sunday dinner and maternal interrogation. The prospect of meeting Francesca Benedetti, the elegant woman she'd glimpsed briefly at the hospital, filled Zara with unexpected nervousness. She'd heard enough about traditional Italian mothers to know that acceptance wasn't guaranteed, especially for a woman who didn't match the family's expectations. "What if she doesn't approve of me?" Salvatore turned toward her, his expression serious and completely focused on her face. "Then she'll learn to. But Zara, I need you to understand something. My mother raised 5 children while my father built this empire, and she did it with more strength and intelligence than most people possess. She's not going to judge you based on your appearance or background. She's going to judge you based on whether she thinks you're good for me. And am I good for you?" The question was vulnerable and uncertain, and Salvatore answered it by rolling over to pin her gently beneath him, his weight settling against her in a way that felt possessive and protective simultaneously. "You're challenging everything I thought I knew about myself, about what I wanted from life. You're making me question assumptions I've held for decades. So no, you're not good for me. You're essential for me." When he kissed her, It was different from the desperate kisses they'd shared the night before. This was slower, deeper, a claiming that felt like a promise. Zara found herself responding with an intensity that surprised her, her body arching against his, her hands fisting in his hair to pull him closer. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, and Zara felt herself crossing another threshold. When Salvatore's hands began exploring the curves of her body through the silk nightgown he'd provided, when she felt the evidence of his desire pressing against her hip, she realized they were approaching a point of no return. "Are you sure?" he asked against her throat, his voice rough with restraint. "Because once I have you, Zara, once you're truly mine, I'm never letting you go." The possessiveness in his words should have alarmed her, but instead it sent heat racing through her veins. She was tired of being careful, tired of protecting herself from possibilities that might hurt her. For once in her methodical, controlled life, she wanted to leap without looking. "I'm sure," she whispered, and felt him go very still against her. What followed was unlike anything Zara had experienced before. Salvatore made love to her with the same focused intensity he brought to everything else, but tempered with a gentleness that spoke to how much her trust meant to him. He took his time mapping every inch of her body, using his mouth and hands to drive her to peaks of sensation she hadn't known were possible, checking constantly to make sure she was with him every step of the way. When he finally joined with her, when they moved together in the ancient rhythm that connected them more intimately than words ever could, Zara understood why she'd waited so long for this. Not because the physical sensation was transcendent, though it was, but because the emotional connection underlying it felt like coming home to a place she hadn't known she was searching for. Afterwards, as they lay tangled together in the aftermath of passion, Salvatore traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder and spoke words that changed everything between them. "I love you, Zara. I know it's too soon. I know our situation is impossible, but I love you anyway." The declaration hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She could feel the tension in his body as he waited for her response. The vulnerability of a man who'd just revealed his heart to someone who held the power to destroy it. "I love you too," she whispered against his chest, feeling the truth of it resonate through her bones. "God help me, I love you too." His arms tightened around her, and for a moment the outside world ceased to exist. There was only this room, this bed, this impossible love they'd found in the midst of danger and moral complexity. But reality intruded, as it always did, in the form of Salvatore's phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. He ignored it the first time, but when it buzzed again immediately, he sighed and reached for it. "Vincent, what is it?" The conversation was brief and conducted in the mixture of English and Italian that Zara was beginning to recognize as Salvatore's business voice. But she could tell from his expression that whatever he was hearing wasn't good news. "What's wrong?" she asked when he ended the call. "The Benedetti Foundation Charity Gala is tonight. It's been planned for months, tickets sold, donations pledged. But given the current situation with the Torinos, Vincent thinks I should cancel." "Why don't you?" "Because canceling would be seen as weakness, and weakness invites more aggression. Sometimes the best defense is refusing to change your routine." He turned toward her, his expression apologetic. "I know it's not ideal timing, but I'd like you to come with me tonight. As my date, officially. I want the world to see us together." The invitation was clearly important to him, but Zara felt a flutter of anxiety at the prospect of being introduced to his world as his official partner. She'd attended charity galas before, but never as the companion of someone whose presence commanded the kind of attention Salvatore would receive. "I don't have anything appropriate to wear. That's already handled." Salvatore's smile suggested he'd anticipated this concern. "I took the liberty of having some options delivered. And before you object to accepting expensive gifts, consider it a professional requirement for accompanying me to a work function." Zara found herself smiling at his careful phrasing. He was learning to navigate her independence with the same strategic thinking he applied to business negotiations. "All right, but I choose my own jewelry." "Agreed. Though you should know my mother will be there tonight, along with most of the family." The nervous flutter in her stomach intensified at the prospect of meeting the entire Benedetti clan in such a public setting. But she'd committed herself to this path, and she wasn't going to start backing down now. Then I'd better make a good impression. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. The dresses that arrived were stunning, clearly chosen by someone with exquisite taste and an accurate assessment of her size. Zara selected a midnight blue gown that complemented her skin tone while maintaining enough elegance to fit the occasion. The fabric was silk and something else she couldn't identify, probably hand-woven and definitely expensive. As evening approached, Zara found herself growing increasingly nervous about the public nature of the event. Being Salvatore's private guest was one thing, but appearing at his side at a high-profile charity gala would make their relationship a matter of public record. There would be photographers, society reporters, and undoubtedly people who would have opinions about Salvatore Benedetti's choice of companion. "You're beautiful," Salvatore said as she emerged from the bedroom, and the admiration in his voice helped settle some of her anxiety. He looked devastating in his black tuxedo. The formal were emphasizing his natural elegance and authority. But it was the way he looked at her, as if she was the most precious thing he'd ever seen, that made her feel truly beautiful. The Benedetti Foundation Gala was held at the Palazzo, in the same ballroom where Antonio had been injured just a week earlier. But tonight, the space had been transformed into something magical, all golden light and elegant flowers, filled with Las Vegas's most prominent citizens raising money for children's medical charities. Salvatore moved through the crowd with easy confidence, introducing Zara to business leaders and politicians and society figures with a pride that made her heart swell. She was surprised by how many people clearly respected him, how many conversations focused on his legitimate business successes and charitable contributions rather than whispered rumors about his other activities. "Dr. Zara Williams, meet Senator Patricia Kovac," Salvatore said, introducing her to a silver-haired woman who served on the hospital board. "Dr. Williams is one of the finest trauma surgeons on the West Coast. I've heard wonderful things about your work," Senator Kovac said warmly. "The hospital speaks very highly of your skills and dedication." As the evening progressed, Zara found herself relaxing into the role of Salvatore's partner. The conversations were intelligent and engaging. The cause was one she believed in strongly, and Salvatore's obvious pride in her accomplishments made her feel valued for who she was rather than simply how she looked on his arm. When Francesca Benedetti approached their table during dinner, Zara felt her nervousness return with full force. "Mama," Salvatore stood as his mother approached, kissing her cheek with obvious affection. "I'd like you to meet Dr. Zara Williams." Mrs. Benedetti was smaller than she'd appeared from a distance, but she carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that suggested decades of managing a powerful family. Her dark eyes, so similar to Salvatore's, studied Zara with intelligent assessment. "Dr. Williams, I understand you saved my grandson's life." "I was simply doing my job, Mrs. Benedetti." Salvatore's mother smiled, and suddenly Zara could see the warmth that had shaped the man she'd fallen in love with. "A job you do very well, apparently. And please, call me Francesca. I have a feeling we'll be seeing much more of each other." The acceptance in those words felt like a gift, and Zara found herself relaxing for the first time since learning about Salvatore's family business. But the peaceful evening was shattered when Vincent appeared at Salvatore's elbow with an expression that made Zara's blood run cold. "Boss, we need to go. Now." "What is it?" "The Torinos. They hit the hospital 20 minutes ago. Took out security, grabbed Dr. Williams's research files, and left a message." "What kind of message?" Zara asked, though she dreaded the answer. "They want you to perform surgery on their boss's son. Kid was shot in a gang initiation gone wrong, and they think having the surgeon who saved a Benedetti perform the operation will ensure success. And if I refuse, they'll keep escalating until you agree." Salvatore's expression had shifted into the cold calculation Zara was beginning to recognize as his war face. This was no longer about business territories or traditional arrangements. The Torinos had made it personal by targeting her directly, using her medical skills as a weapon against him. "Where are they holding the operation?" "Abandoned warehouse in North Las Vegas. They've set up a makeshift operating room, but the conditions are questionable at best." As the implications sank in, Zara felt her medical training warring with every survival instinct she possessed. Operating in an uncontrolled environment, under threat of violence, on a patient whose family had no qualms about hurting innocent people, violated every principle of medical ethics she'd sworn to uphold. But if she refused, more people would die. The Torinos had already demonstrated their willingness to hurt hospital staff to get her attention, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "Like hell you will." Salvatore's voice carried the kind of cold fury that made everyone at nearby tables fall silent. "Salvatore, if I don't do this, they'll keep hurting people. They'll escalate until the casualties become unacceptable. And if you go into that warehouse, you might not come out alive. Then we make sure I come out alive." The conversation continued in rapid Italian between Salvatore and Vincent, with occasional contributions from Francesca Benedetti that suggested the family matriarch was not someone to underestimate in a crisis. Finally, Salvatore turned back to Zara with an expression that mixed admiration and terror in equal measure. "If we do this, we do it my way. Full tactical support, complete extraction plan, and you follow every security protocol without question." Agreed. What followed was the most terrifying 3 hours of Zara's life. The warehouse operation was exactly as dangerous as she'd anticipated, with armed men hovering over her every movement as she worked to save the life of a 17-year-old boy who'd been shot in the chest during a gang initiation. But her medical training took over, blocking out everything except the patient in front of her and the surgery that would determine whether they all lived through the night. When she finally stepped back from the improvised operating table, the boy's vital signs were stable and the immediate danger had passed. "You did good, Doc," one of the Torino soldiers said, lowering his weapon for the first time since she'd arrived. That's when Salvatore's rescue operation began. The warehouse erupted in coordinated chaos as Salvatore's men moved with military precision to secure the building and neutralize the Torino forces. Zara found herself shielded behind an overturned table, watching the man she loved orchestrate a battle with the same focused intensity she'd seen him bring to business negotiations. When the shooting stopped, when the immediate threat had been eliminated, Salvatore appeared at her side with blood on his shirt and desperation in his eyes. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands running over her body to check for injuries she didn't have. "I'm fine. The boy is stable." "Is it over?" "It's over." And then he was kissing her with the desperate hunger of a man who'd thought he might lose everything. And Zara was kissing him back with the relief of someone who'd survived something that should have destroyed them both. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I love you, and I'm never putting you in danger like that again." "I love you too. But Salvatore, this can't keep happening. We can't build a life together if every enemy of yours becomes a threat to me." "I know, which is why I'm making some changes." As they drove away from the warehouse, leaving the Torino threat permanently eliminated and the rescued boy in the care of legitimate medical facilities, Salvatore began outlining the future he wanted to build with her. A future that involved transitioning his family's business toward complete legitimacy, using their resources and influence to protect rather than threaten, building something together that honored both their strengths and values. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But as Zara listened to his plans, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek, she realized that love sometimes meant taking impossible chances on imperfect people. And Salvatore Benedetti, with all his contradictions and complications, was absolutely worth the risk. 2 weeks after the warehouse incident, Zara stood on the terrace of Salvatore's penthouse, watching the sun set over Las Vegas while he handled what he'd assured her was the last of the cleanup from the Torino situation. The threat had been eliminated permanently, but the aftermath involved complicated negotiations with other families and federal investigators who wanted to understand exactly what had happened that night. She'd given her statement to the FBI 3 times, each interview carefully managed by lawyers who specialized in situations where organized crime and legitimate medical emergencies intersected. The official story was that Dr. Williams had been coerced into providing emergency medical care and had cooperated with law enforcement to resolve the situation safely. No charges would be filed against anyone involved in the rescue operation. The boy she'd operated on was recovering well at University Medical Center, his family having decided that perhaps a different lifestyle choice might be healthier for their son's future. Zara had checked on him twice, professional concern overriding the complicated circumstances of how she'd met him. But despite the resolution of the immediate crisis, she found herself struggling with the emotional aftermath of everything that had happened. She'd killed no one herself, but people had died because of her involvement with Salvatore. The moral weight of that reality sat heavily on her conscience, even though she understood the necessity of what had occurred. "You're thinking too hard again," Salvatore said, stepping onto the terrace with 2 glasses of wine and the kind of gentle expression he'd worn more often since the warehouse incident. "Just processing. It's been a complicated few weeks." He settled beside her on the outdoor sofa, close enough that their legs touched, and handed her one of the wine glasses. The gesture was simple and domestic, but it represented the kind of casual intimacy that had developed between them as they navigated the aftermath of trauma together. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Any of it?" The question was vulnerable in a way that few of Salvatore's questions ever were, and Zara knew he was asking about more than just the recent crisis. He was asking about her choice to stay, to love him, to accept his world despite its moral complexities. "I regret that people had to die. I regret that my medical skills were used as a weapon. But I don't regret falling in love with you, if that's what you're really asking." Relief flickered across his features, quickly followed by something that looked like determination. "Zara, there's something I need to say to you. Something I should have said weeks ago." She turned toward him, noting the nervous energy in his posture that suggested this conversation was important to him. "I owe you an apology. Not just for the danger you faced because of me, but for the assumptions I made about what I wanted in a partner before I knew you existed." The dinner conversation about pale, fragile, traditional wives felt like a lifetime ago, but Zara could see that Salvatore had been carrying the weight of those words since she'd first challenged his thinking. "That night at my family dinner, when I said my wife would be pale and fragile and traditional, I was describing a fantasy that had nothing to do with what would actually make me happy. I was describing someone who would fit into my world without changing it, someone who would complement my authority without challenging it." He reached for her hands, his fingers intertwining with hers with the kind of careful attention he brought to everything that mattered to him. "What I didn't understand then, what I've learned from loving you, is that I didn't want a compliment. I wanted a partner. Someone strong enough to stand beside me, intelligent enough to challenge my decisions when they're wrong, brave enough to face the complications of this life with me." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight with emotion, but she could hear that he had more to say. "You're everything I claimed I didn't want, and you're everything I actually needed. You're not pale or fragile or traditional, and thank God for that. You're strong and brilliant and brave, and you make me want to be better than I was before I knew you." Before Zara could respond, he was sliding off the sofa to kneel beside her, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket with movements that betrayed his nervousness. "Salvatore, what are you doing?" "What I should have done the moment I realized I was in love with you." He opened the box to reveal a ring that took her breath away. It wasn't the massive diamond she might have expected, but rather an intricate design of white gold and sapphires that somehow seemed to capture the color of her eyes. "Dr. Zara Williams, will you marry me? Not because you fit some predetermined idea of what a mafia wife should be, but because you're exactly who you are. Strong and independent and brilliant and brave. Will you be my partner in everything, challenge me when I need it, and let me love you for the rest of our lives?" The proposal was everything she hadn't known she wanted, focused on her strength rather than her willingness to be protected, on partnership rather than submission, on love rather than convenience. But the magnitude of what he was offering, what he was asking her to commit to, made her breath catch in her throat. "Your mother mentioned that she expected to see more of me," Zara said, buying time to process the enormity of the moment. "My mother has been planning our wedding since the night she met you. Apparently, she's already chosen the flowers. And your business, the transition to legitimacy you mentioned, already in progress. Marco is handling the details, but within 2 years, the Benedetti family will be completely legitimate. No more traditional arrangements, no more moral gray areas. Just successful businesses that help people instead of controlling them." He paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through to her soul. "I know it's not simple, Kara. I know loving me means accepting a complicated past and an uncertain future. But I also know that I want to spend every day for the rest of my life earning the privilege of being your husband." The word husband sent warmth spreading through her chest, followed immediately by a flutter of nervous excitement at the thought of building a life with this impossible, wonderful, complicated man. "What about children?" she asked, thinking of all the conversations they'd need to have about the practicalities of merging their lives. I want them. Sons and daughters who inherit your intelligence and strength, who grow up in a world where their parents' love for each other is the foundation for everything else. The image he painted of children who would be raised with both their strengths in a world made better by their parents' choices felt like something worth building toward. And when our daughter comes home from school asking why some of her classmates' parents whisper about her father's past, we'll tell her the truth. That people make mistakes, that families can change, and that love is strong enough to overcome almost anything. We'll teach her that her father learned to be better because he loved her mother. The answer was honest and thoughtful, acknowledging the challenges while affirming the values that would guide their parenting. It was the answer of a man who'd given serious consideration to the responsibilities that would come with the life he was proposing. Yes, Zara said, her voice stronger and more certain than she'd expected it to be. Yes, I'll marry you. The relief and joy that transformed Salvatore's face made her heart race with anticipation for everything that lay ahead of them. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, when he stood to kiss her with a tenderness that spoke of promises and permanence, Zara felt the last of her reservations dissolve into certainty that she was making the right choice. But their private moment was interrupted by the sound of the penthouse door opening, followed by voices that suggested multiple people had arrived unannounced. Salvatore, your mother said we were welcome to stop by, Antonio's voice called from the living room, followed by the unmistakable sound of Francesca Benedetti organizing something. Were you expecting them? Zara asked, suddenly conscious of her tear-stained cheeks and the emotional intensity that probably showed on both their faces. Not exactly, but I suspect my mother has been monitoring the situation. She has excellent instincts about timing. When they entered the living room, they found not just Antonio and Francesca, but also Vincent, Marco, and what appeared to be several other family members Zara hadn't met yet. The coffee table was already laid out with champagne and pastries, as if someone had been planning a celebration. She said yes, Salvatore announced without preamble, his arm around Zara's waist in a gesture that felt both possessive and protective. The room erupted in congratulations and excited conversation, with Francesca immediately claiming the right to see the ring and Antonio insisting that he'd known this would happen from the moment he saw them together at the hospital. As Zara found herself swept into the warmth of family celebration, she realized that this was what she'd been missing in her carefully controlled, independent life. Not the luxury or the power, but the sense of belonging to something larger than herself, of being part of a family that would fight for each other no matter what challenges they faced. But the celebration was interrupted by Zara's own phone ringing, the caller ID showing her mother's number from Chicago. I should take this, she said, stepping back onto the terrace for privacy. Zara, honey, how are you? Her mother's voice carried the warmth and concern that had shaped Zara's childhood, along with the underlying worry that had been present since news of the hospital incidents had reached Chicago. I'm good, Mom. Really good, actually. I have some news. Please tell me you're coming home for a visit. Your father and I have been worried sick about all this violence in Las Vegas. Actually, I'm getting married. The silence that followed stretched long enough that Zara began to wonder if the connection had been lost. Married? To whom? His name is Salvatore Benedetti. He's a businessman here in Las Vegas, and I love him very much. Another pause, during which Zara could practically hear her mother's mind working to process this unexpected development. How long have you known him? And why is this the first I'm hearing about him? It's been a whirlwind few weeks, Mom. But I'd really like you and Dad to meet him. Maybe you could come out for a visit, or we could come to Chicago. Zara, honey, I need to ask this directly. Is this man connected to the violence that's been happening around the hospital? The question was fair and expected, but it forced Zara to confront exactly how much truth she was prepared to share with her parents. His family has had some conflicts with other families here, but that's being resolved. He's transitioning all his business interests toward completely legitimate operations. That's not exactly a no. No, it's not. But Mom, he's a good man. He saved my life, he protects people I care about, and he loves me for exactly who I am. Isn't that what you and Dad always said mattered most? The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with her mother extracting promises that she and Salvatore would visit Chicago within the month so her parents could meet him properly. When Zara finally returned to the living room, she found Salvatore in deep conversation with his family about wedding logistics and business transitions. "Everything all right?" he asked, immediately focusing on her with the kind of attention that made her feel like the most important thing in his world. "My parents want to meet you." "When?" "As soon as possible. They're concerned about the violence that's been in the news, and they want to make sure I'm not making a terrible mistake." Salvatore's expression grew thoughtful as he considered the challenge of convincing two prominent Chicago doctors that their daughter should marry a former mafia boss. "We'll fly out next weekend. I'll answer all their questions honestly, and hopefully they'll see that their daughter means everything to me." The confidence in his voice suggested he understood exactly what he was getting himself into and welcomed the challenge of proving himself worthy of her family's acceptance. What followed was a month of complicated logistics and emotional conversations as two very different families worked to understand and accept the union that would bind them together. Zara's parents were initially skeptical, her father particularly concerned about the potential dangers associated with Salvatore's past business activities. But Salvatore handled their scrutiny with the same focused attention he brought to difficult business negotiations, answering every question honestly and demonstrating through his actions that his love for their daughter was genuine and transformative. By the end of their Chicago visit, Dr. Marcus Williams was discussing medical ethics with Salvatore over expensive wine, and Dr. Patricia Williams was helping Francesca plan a wedding that would honor both families' traditions. The transition of the Benedetti family business proceeded more smoothly than anyone had anticipated, aided by Salvatore's reputation for honor and his genuine desire to build something legitimate for the next generation. Former rivals became business partners, traditional arrangements evolved into legal contracts, and the family's considerable resources were redirected toward ventures that built communities rather than controlling them. 6 months after their first meeting in a hospital corridor, Zara stood in the bridal suite of the Palazzo Benedetti, wearing a dress that somehow managed to honor both her African heritage and Italian wedding traditions, preparing to marry the man who'd challenged every assumption she'd held about love and compromise. "You look magnificent," Francesca said, adjusting the delicate gold jewelry that had been passed down through generations of Benedetti brides. "Salvatore is going to forget how to breathe when he sees you." Through the window, Zara could see the ceremony space they'd created in the palazzo's garden, decorated with white roses and elegant lighting that would create magic as the sun set over the desert. Guests were already arriving, a mixture of Chicago doctors and Las Vegas business leaders, former colleagues and new family, all gathered to celebrate a love that had grown from impossible circumstances. "Are you ready for this?" her sister Lily asked, having flown in from college to serve as maid of honor. Zara looked at herself in the mirror, seeing not just the elegant bride she'd become, but the confident woman who'd chosen love over safety, partnership over independence, a complicated future over a simple past. "I'm ready." When the ceremony began, when she walked down the aisle towards Salvatore waiting under an arch of white roses with the Las Vegas skyline glittering behind him, Zara felt every choice she'd made over the past months crystallize into absolute certainty. This was her future, complicated and challenging and absolutely worth every risk she'd taken to claim it. 1 year later, Salvatore stood in the kitchen of their new home in the hills overlooking Las Vegas, preparing Sunday dinner for the extended family gathering that had become their monthly tradition. The house was smaller than his penthouse had been, but infinitely warmer, filled with the kind of comfortable elegance that spoke to shared choices rather than solitary wealth. Through the large windows, he could see Zara in the garden, checking on the herb plants she'd insisted on growing despite the desert climate. She wore a flowing sundress that accommodated the gentle curve of her belly, her natural hair caught up in a loose bun that allowed the Nevada breeze to cool her neck. At 6 months pregnant, she was more beautiful than ever, radiating the kind of contentment that came from building something meaningful together. The transformation of the Benedetti family business had been completed 3 months ahead of schedule, with the last of their traditional arrangements formally dissolved and replaced by legitimate partnerships. Salvatore now spent his days managing a growing empire of hotels, restaurants, and medical facilities that employed thousands of people and contributed millions to community development projects. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was infinitely better than the one he'd been living. "Uncle Sal, you're burning the garlic," Antonio called from the dining room, where he was setting the table with his girlfriend Maria, a kindergarten teacher who'd somehow managed to keep him grounded while pursuing her graduate degree in education. Salvatore quickly adjusted the heat under the pan, laughing at himself for being distracted by watching his wife tend to plants that had no business thriving in the desert, but somehow managed to flourish under her care. Everything Zara touched seemed to grow stronger, including him. The front door opened with the familiar chaos that announced his mother's arrival, followed by the voices of siblings and cousins who'd driven over from various parts of the city. Sunday dinners had become sacred in the Benedetti family, a time when business was forgotten and focus shifted to the relationships that made everything else worthwhile. "Where's my daughter-in-law?" Francesca called out, immediately heading for the garden doors with the kind of determined energy that suggested she had important grandmother business to conduct. Salvatore smiled as he watched his mother embrace Zara with the fierce protectiveness she'd shown toward her from their first meeting. Francesca had adopted Zara completely, treating her pregnancy like a family project that required constant supervision and unlimited advice. "How are you feeling, cara mia?" Francesca asked, her hands immediately going to Zara's belly with the unconscious maternal gesture that had become second nature. "Tired but happy. The baby's been active today, like she knows there's going to be good food and family conversation." Francesca's eyes lit up with the excitement of someone who'd been hoping for a granddaughter to spoil. "You've decided it's a girl. We don't know for certain, but I have a feeling." Zara glanced toward the kitchen, catching Salvatore's eye through the window and giving him the kind of smile that still made his heart race after all these months together. The dinner conversation flowed around the table with the easy warmth of family who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Business was discussed briefly, mostly updates on the new medical center the Benedetti Foundation was funding in partnership with University Medical Center. Antonio shared news about his final semester of college and his plans to join the legitimate family business after graduation. Marco announced his engagement to his longtime girlfriend, a public defender who'd initially been skeptical of the family's transformation but had come to appreciate their genuine commitment to positive change. As dessert was being served, Zara's phone buzzed with what appeared to be an important message. She read it quickly, then looked up with an expression of excitement and surprise. "What is it?" Salvatore asked, immediately alert to any change in her emotional state. "Dr. Harrison just got approval for the Pediatric Trauma Center expansion. The board voted unanimously to move forward with the project, and they want to break ground next month." The Pediatric Trauma Center had been Zara's passion project since returning to work after their honeymoon, a state-of-the-art facility designed to provide specialized care for children who suffered traumatic injuries. The Benedetti Foundation was funding the majority of the construction costs, but the hospital board's approval had been uncertain due to concerns about ongoing operating expenses. "That's wonderful, Cara. You've worked so hard to make this happen." "We've worked hard," she corrected gently. "This wouldn't be possible without the Foundation's support, and the Foundation wouldn't exist without your family's commitment to using resources to help people instead of controlling them." The comment was typical of Zara, always quick to acknowledge partnership where others might claim individual credit. It was one of the thousands of small ways she'd changed his understanding of what strength and leadership actually looked like. As the evening wound down and family members began heading home to their own Sunday night routines, Salvatore found himself alone with Zara in their kitchen, loading the dishwasher while she sorted leftovers into containers for relatives to take home. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly, a question that had become routine but never lost its importance. "Miss what specifically?" "The simplicity of making decisions without having to consider how they'll affect a dozen different legitimate business interests and community partnerships." Salvatore paused in his task, considering the question with the honesty their relationship had always demanded. Sometimes, there was a clarity to the old way of doing things, a directness that didn't require committee meetings and regulatory compliance. But that clarity came with a moral cost I'm not willing to pay anymore. He moved closer to her, his hands settling gently on her shoulders as he met her eyes. "Besides, I have something now that I never had before. A partner who makes me want to be better than I was, who challenges me to find solutions that help rather than harm. I wouldn't trade that for all the simplicity in the world." "Good," because this baby is going to require a lot of complicated solutions over the next 18 years. The mention of their child filled Salvatore with the same mixture of excitement and terror that had been his constant companion since learning about the pregnancy. He was going to be responsible for shaping a small person who would inherit both the privileges and responsibilities that came with the Benedetti name. "What kind of world are we bringing her into?" he asked, voicing the concern that kept him awake some nights. "A better one than the world we inherited. Not perfect, but better. And she'll have parents who love each other and love her enough to keep making it better." That evening, as they lay in bed with Zara's head on his shoulder and his hand resting on the curve of her belly where their daughter was growing, Salvatore found himself thinking about the conversation at his family's dinner table more than a year ago. He'd been so certain then about what he wanted in a wife. Pale and fragile and traditional. Someone who would complement his authority without challenging it, who would fit into his world without changing it. What he discovered was something infinitely more valuable. A woman who was strong enough to transform both of them, brave enough to love him despite his complicated past, intelligent enough to envision a future neither of them could have imagined separately. Zara shifted against him, her breathing deep and even with the contentment of someone who felt completely safe and loved. "I love you, Mrs. Benedetti," he whispered into the darkness. "I love you too, Mr. Benedetti. All of you, including the parts that scared me at first." As sleep began to claim them both, Salvatore's thoughts drifted to the nephew who would soon be graduating from college, the young man who'd begun looking for his own path toward love and partnership. The next time Antonio asked about the kind of woman he should look for, Salvatore knew exactly what he would say. Find someone who challenges you to be better than you thought you could be. Someone who sees your potential and loves you enough to hold you accountable to it. Someone who makes you want to build a world worthy of the children you'll raise together. Don't look for someone who fits your expectations. Look for someone who makes you realize your expectations were too small. The perfect wife isn't the one who complements your weaknesses. She's the one who inspires you to overcome them. 3 months later, as Salvatore held his newborn daughter for the first time, while Zara recovered from a delivery that had gone exactly according to plan, he understood that everything he'd thought he knew about love and partnership had been preparation for this moment. Isabella Francesca Benedetti was perfect in ways he'd never imagined, with Zara's intelligent eyes and what appeared to be his family's stubborn determination. She was going to grow up in a world where her parents' love for each other was the foundation for everything else, where strength was measured by the ability to lift others up rather than tear them down. "She's beautiful," Zara said softly, her voice tired but filled with wonder as she watched Salvatore cradle their daughter with the careful reverence of someone holding the most precious thing in existence. "She's perfect, just like her mother." As Isabella settled into sleep against his chest, Salvatore silently promised his daughter that he would spend the rest of his life being the kind of man she could be proud to call her father. A man who'd learned that true strength came from partnership, that real power came from building rather than destroying, and that the most important legacy he could leave was proof that love was strong enough to transform anyone willing to let it. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but bright with possibility. There would be challenges, as there always were when building something meaningful. But they would face those challenges together, as partners in the truest sense of the word. And if their daughter someday brought home someone who challenged all their assumptions about what would make her happy, Salvatore hoped he would have the wisdom to remember this moment and trust that love, real love, was always worth the risk. Have you ever found yourself completely wrong about what you thought you wanted in life, only to discover that being wrong led you to something infinitely better? Love has a way of teaching us that our limitations exist mostly in our imagination, and that the most beautiful partnerships are built when two people inspire each other to become more than they ever dreamed possible.